And finally, on our couch in our panel, we have with us, I just want to get his full bio here first, John Mccaffrey, researcher, bilingual Leo Pacific Coalition. John Mccaffrey is a senior lecturer in the School of Arts, Languages and Literacies, Faculty of Education at the University of Auckland. He and his wife Judy are the founding researchers for the bilingual Leo Pacific Coalition and the University of Auckland's recent Endangered Pacific Languages Te Wharekura Research Project. John's teaching and research interests are in Māori and Pasifika languages, literacy and diversity, biliteracy and bilingual immersion education. He has been centrally involved in the maintenance and revival movements for Te Reo Māori for over 30 years and Pacific languages since 1985. John's work and research in partnership with Pacific communities explores bilingual biliteracy education for Pacific children as an effective way to learn English. There's going to be some good discussion here about that. The best way to significantly raise academic achievement and maintain and revive Pasifika languages intergenerationally in Aotearoa and in the Pacific. And John is a learner of Samoan, Tongan, Cook Island, Wangahau Niue, and is also a speaker of Māori and a foundation member of Te Reo Māori Society. Welcome, John. Please put your hands together. We have got an impressive panel here tonight, and I'm sure they would love to hear your questions, so don't forget, we will give you that opportunity to ask them some questions. This is a big topic, and it's one that's it's a hot potato really in our communities. Not one that is new. It has been around for a long time, and maybe since last year with the books being pulled, that it really spurred on some real movement towards where we stand with our languages and also getting them recognised officially by the government. What we're going to do is ask our panellists some questions. We've kind of set aside 3 questions to start off with, but we're going to move from those and go into other areas also based on your questions and some of your thoughts here tonight. So first of all, this is how we're going to do it. I'd like to ask each of the panellists to basically tell us where you stand when it comes to the preservation of our Pacific languages. And you can answer that, but let me give you that question again. Where do you stand when it comes to the preservation of our Pacific languages? And because we started with you, Peseta, we're going to continue with that. Where do we stand from your perspective?
Where do I stand? And talofa lava to you first, Sandra, and both fellow panellists and the audience here as well as our online audience. Where do I stand? I'm a believer in preserving our languages. Samoan language, culture, values, traditions, customs, norms, they all form part, and they start with the language, they start with the people. And I can only speak personally from my own perspective as someone who was born in Samoa, grew up in Mangere, as you pointed out earlier this evening, who learnt my mother tongue from my parents in a home environment that was supportive of that. But there were difficulties, there are barriers to learning, particularly in the context of being a Pacific person living in New Zealand. And it's a different context to a Samoan living in Samoa. So, I recall growing up in Mangere and seeing, our parents would require us to speak Samoan at home and Samoan only. And that was their way of demanding from us that we keep our culture and our values close to us. And that, as time went on, that became increasingly difficult to have kids speaking Samoan at home, yet learning English in a primary school that was multicultural. And so the barriers were there. We also had, as many Pacific people, the opportunities to speak at home, speak at church. So there was the church community, there was the family community, there was our wider ainga, potupotu, which was our sort of extended family, if you like, and where you attended numbers of, gatherings, whether they be funerals, they are weddings, the types of things that Samoans gather for. And you saw how the language was spoken and how this language was important to us as Samoans. So do I want that for my children? Yes. Is it difficult? Yes. When I think of my 10-month-old child, our daughter, who is Samoan, Niuean, Palangi, growing up in New Zealand, that is going to be a hard mix to attain the language skills. How do we do it? I think, that's why we're here tonight. But certainly that's my opening salvo. It's important, yes. Is government part of that? Yes. And, we'll talk about how the role that government plays in terms of early childhood education, in terms of the curriculum, NCA curriculum for Samoan and Cook Island, at university, even the role that Pacific Education plays, the PEC. But still, I think that it's important to note that it's in your families, it's in our churches, it's in our wider families, that it's our heritage, and we've got to protect it. So the barriers are very much there. It's how we go about finding the solutions to preserving our language and our culture and the wider sort of heritage of being Pacific or being Samoan for me in this country. So.
Well, I'm glad that you said yes, the government has a role to play. So I know a lot of people will be wanting to know what that role is. We will get to that. Leslie, what do you think in terms of, or where do you stand?
From a Ministry of Education perspective, we know that Pasifika peoples want the best of all worlds, that they want to succeed in education, that they want to retain and maintain very strong identities, languages and cultures. And so the work that we do reflect that. For example, the Pasifika Education Plan, which is the government strategy for Pasifika education, has very strong commitment to languages. The early childhood curriculum Te Whāriki also values Pasifika languages, identities and cultures. And the same goes for the New Zealand curriculum. And the ministry's heard the call from Pasifika communities to develop their language guidelines, and 5 of those guidelines are now available in schools. And there's a lot of work, as we'll discuss later on, that are focused on early childhood education, and early childhood is provided in all kinds of Pasifika languages, from Tongan to Samoan to Cook Island, Maori, Niuean, Tokelauan, and many of those are total immersion and some of them are bilingual. And so you have that, and then kids go into primary schooling, and of course they arrive at a media where English is beginning to be taught, and our thinking is that languages are really important, and so effective teachers need to make sure that they actually know where these kids are coming from and how best to provide support for them to continue their learning. And later in the school system, they have to learn in English and to succeed in English as well. And one of the interesting things is that when we go out to communities, it depends on who you're talking to as well, because some parents and some leaders will say to the ministry, well, we want our kids to be doing much better in English. And I don't think that's because they don't value language necessarily. It's also a realization that at the end of the day, kids have to succeed in English media. But I personally believe in what all of our communities want. I live in a very, in Palmerston North, say, and that's very different to Auckland's population makeup. And when my kids went to early childhood education, there were no Tongan language centres available. And so I made it, as a parent, I made it a role that I encouraged them at home to speak Tongan as much as possible. And we chose to attend a Tongan total immersion church because that's another way of the language living in communities. So I think it's a great question, and certainly I don't think anyone's against the idea that languages are not important. But the three things are all important in terms of the ministry's work. You know, identities, languages, and cultures, very important.
Thank you, Milo. Sefita.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, the members of the panel. I'm here because I'm firmly on the corner of the passionate about the language. But I like to think that I'm passionate with some degree of realism. And I'm particularly interested in why we came together, and my keenness to be part of this is because John, through his great work, and the impetus is now to place language survival on the table for politicians to mull over. And I'd like to think that in doing that, not only do we invite the focus to be on survival of our languages, but it also invites us, I think, to have a look and see what is it that we need to do in order to make sure that it does happen. And I'm not talking about twisting Sam's arm on election year to make great promises for us in resourcing what it is that we're looking for. I'm looking at the history of why languages, and you mentioned Tokelauan, Cook Island, Maori, and Niuean, and it would probably be fair to say that it's already in its last throes, for want of a better description. Yeah. Alongside of that, we have Māori, which we're now seeing to have a resurgence, and I think it's likely to survive. Not only survive, but it's a language on its being able to come back from the dead or from the brink, could actually teach Pacific languages, teach Pacific communities a lot about why it is that we're losing it, what it takes to bring it back, and more importantly, what it needs to take it into the future. It's the taking it into the future that I worry about, because tonight we will hear a lot about the educational value, the need to push language at a very young age. But in the business that we're in, and as communications and making sure that, that we are in touch, no one seems to be to place any emphasis on growing a language. And by that I mean about creating the vocabulary that is needed to take the language from today into tomorrow, so that, for instance, Tongan can compete successfully with its competitor, English, and anticipating that we will probably have to compete successfully against Mandarin to actually have a show of making it into the future. So I'm here because I'm passionate about the survival of the language, but I do worry if we're going to bank on and rely on politicians to do it. 3 languages dead while New Zealand looked after the Pacific. Yeah. It's not a great start. No. And I know that John has done his homework, and I know that it's a different environment that we're in today. Yeah. But I'm heartened by the fact that we have more tools today, I think, in order for communities who live outside of the heritage countries to enable us to actually do this, because to some extent, Lesieri and John will probably agree, the coalface, as it were, the tension areas for Tongan is not in Nuku'alofa. It's actually in Auckland, it's in Sydney, it's probably in Los Angeles, and in Alaska, for want of a better description. Definitely in Hawaii, because I see my good friend and colleague Tevita, who loves Les up on the board. He's a passionate, as passionate as I am, even more, I think, to be in the same corner and to push for the same things. And that's looking at where the future is, having learned about the limitations of Ministry of Education, the limitations of politicians, and the limitations of parents in being able to guarantee that the language does survive. That's where I am.